Hi there, welcome once again to our weekly look at all things energy related and beyond. It's Fuel for Thought. I'm Scott Squires. Pleased to be joined as per usual by the insider Dan McTagg. And then a couple of things on our list to talk about today. Certainly tariffs, one of those. But first things first, as we record this on a Friday, prices have already been set in the Atlantic region. But overall, there's been such volatility, it seems, the last little while with energy markets, with oil markets, and what's going on with tariffs and everything that's happening with OPEC. Kind of wade through it as best you can with your decades of experience. Where are we with oil pricing, gas prices, diesel, home heating fuel, etc.? Where are we, and where do you see it going short term?
You're very right. It's been a turbulent week and for good reason. An economic crisis on a scale we haven't seen probably in 30 years. I would say it's equivalent to what we saw when we had the 2008 global economic collapse, or even before that, the Asian currency crisis of 94 and again in 97, 98. So for the country, it's a very unusual time and very difficult to make long-term predictions. But of course, here in Atlantic Canada, four regulated bodies have come out with four different decisions as to how to interpret markets. Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and PEI saw prices go up, while Newfoundland saw prices go down. It goes to show you that trying to create a synthetic market by pretending you can use this algorithm or you can use that particular platform, Opus, Platts, or some use the one that's more often used now, Argus, can somehow give you the numbers that you're supposed to use. It's really made a real mess of things. Consumers may not realize it when it comes to diesel, gasoline, heating oil, propane, but they're not being well served by governments trying to second guess what the market has done over the past week. Now, specific to the past week, you'll notice, Scott, that unlike some guessers in gasoline prices, I didn't go out with one on Friday. I refused to because I didn't know what was going to be in the announcement. And of course, as the old expression goes, the devil's in the details. We didn't get a 25% tariff on energy. We didn't get a 25% tariff at all when it was decided there'd be a 30-day reprieve. So we saw energy markets see oil shoot up to about $77 a barrel from $72 a barrel. We saw gasoline move up roughly about 10 cents a gallon, 11 cents a gallon. And we saw the Canadian dollar drop from 143.8 all the way down to 148.1. That was Sunday night into Monday morning. It meant, of course, weakness of the Canadian dollar. That's the number of pennies it takes to buy a US dollar. So the Canadian dollar was weakening. The moment there was some kind of a 30-day reprieve, with Canada basically giving in and saying, yes, we'll do the border stuff. And yes, we'll recognize that fentanyl is a problem. And yes, we'll attend some of the other things. We got, an hour or two after President Sheinbaum of Mexico was able to get a deal, at least a reprieve, we got one as well. So look, that meant that prices went up and then went right back down, and we're starting to see a continuation of that downward trend. But it won't happen, obviously, for diesel because colder weather means more demand. And of course, we still deal with this lingering problem of undersupply and over demand for products. So it looks like prices are going to remain fairly high at very uncomfortable levels for the foreseeable future. And we're not that far away, I would say 6 weeks from April 1st, when everybody who loves these things, carbon taxes, which of course my old party is trying to get rid of now that they've spent 9, 10 years regaling us on it and why it's a great idea, suddenly deciding that they're going to try to find another way to get rid of it. It sounds like I was an MP in 1993, and my party campaigned on scrapping the GST, said we'll find a system that replaces it. There was no such thing. And the promise was hollow. Consumers know they're being gouged. And except for those on the extreme left and people who don't have any concern about the cost of living, this is having an enormous impact on the bottom line. And it suggests to me no plan in the future has to include making life more unaffordable and more costly for Canadians. And that's why we need to get rid of not just the carbon tax, but the second carbon tax, as well as the entire notion of net zero frivolities, which is really an attempt at trying to force our economy to go into a standstill.
Well, that kind of sets me up for asking you about carbon taxes and other things that some of the Liberal leadership candidates, as you said, now seem to be either changing their tune on or rewriting the past or their future, however you want to put it. There certainly seems to be a move to jump almost on Pierre Poilievre's position about scrap the tax. However, as someone who sat in Parliament for close to 2 decades and has had decades of experience in the political realm and in privy councils and so on, Mark Carney seems to be the anointed one. It's almost a guarantee, if there is can be such a thing at this point, that he will be the Liberal leader and become prime minister. What do you make of the comments that he's been making, of the, I guess some would say, policies that he's been putting out there and talking about scrapping the consumer tax on the carbon tax, but then making it higher for businesses, corporations, companies, etc. Kind of wade through it all, Dan, from your perspective, because I see a lot of rank and file Canadians kind of, in my opinion, having the wool pulled over their eyes by the Liberal Party right now and some of their stances and positions, and certainly by the things that Mr. Carney is saying. Give him the benefit of the doubt, absolutely. But again, just from what I see Canadians being a bit hoodwinked here. What's your take on what the Liberal Party is saying, and in particular, Mr. Carney?
I think Canadians can afford to be fleeced with green policies again. Mark Carney was very much at the heart of the net zero green policies that have hurt and damaged and undermined actual Canadians today's standard of living. To make that a greater point, this is a guy who advocated the choking off of Canadian oil and gas, our number one revenue generator that pays for hospitals, pays for our pensions, and maintains our standard of living, including the employment of tens of thousands of people across the country. This is a man who believes that Canada and Canada only, following the dictates of the World Economic Forum and the United Nations, should be the International Boy Scouts or Girl Guides when it comes to green energy. And what's really happened is not that Canada has become any cleaner. In fact, it's very clean to begin with. It is that we have somebody who's more interested in taking his company called Brookfield, investing in pipelines in Brazil and in the Middle East. This is a fellow who should not have access to any cabinet document or any briefings as it relates to the tariff or any other issue. Why? I'm a privy councillor. I got it from the Queen, or at the time, now of course the King. So Dan McTeague, Honorable Dan McTeague, privy councillor, which means I have already received the permission to read these things or see these things if I were elected. Mr. Carney is neither privy councillor and he's not elected. And right now he's not even elected leader of the Liberal Party. But the Liberals are so arrogant that they believe that they can have a replay of Justin Trudeau and he can basically swing in on the coattails that tells every Canadian he is no different than Justin Trudeau. Worse, he doesn't believe in democracy, nor is he willing to take into account the fundamentals of our parliamentary system. And so I suspect that in the days to come, not only do we find Mark Carney trying to play this game of, trying to get rid of carbon taxes and someone else will pay for it, unless you're really dumb. And I don't say this openly. If you tax a company, they're simply going to pass it on to Canadians. They do that already in the second carbon tax, clean fuel standard here in the Maritime Atlantic provinces, where it's 6 to 8 cents a liter. You're paying for it. So do not fall for the guile of people whose only interest has become PM, however short that will be, have that name PM so they can go around the world and do whatever he has been doing. The reality is that Mark Carney is bad for our economy, and he's not quite open about who he really is. We don't know much about Mark Carney. We know that he doesn't like to talk to media. He wants only select media and select questions. You can't run an open and democratic society with somebody who's always running and hiding, and that's Mark Carney. And if you think, oh, it's a new fresh face, we can do this again, you made a mistake 3 times electing a government that's basically taken the country and thrown it in the garbage. If you think you can do it a 4th time, check your bank account. Because at the end of the day, it won't just be yours that's depleted. It'll be your children and likely your grandchildren on this path.
All this, Dan, is taking me back to conversations that you and I had months and months ago, and that was about polling. And at the time, a lot of the polling was showing that Pierre Poilievre and the National Conservatives had a very comfortable lead and were looking good to get perhaps a super majority in Parliament should an election be called. Now, all of a sudden, we're seeing a lot of polling where they're showing that Mark Carney is the preferred leader and the person that Canadians would prefer to lead the country. And we're seeing a lot of other polling that is showing the gaps narrowing, showing Ontario being almost all Liberal federally. And I mention that because several months ago, you talked about how you felt that as things got a little closer to a potential election and a potential new Liberal leader, that you might start to see some of this type of polling with the Liberals all of a sudden getting a little wind in their sails. What do you make of polling, and what do you want to say to Canadians who maybe put a lot of weight in polls that they see or read?
Well, I think a lot of Canadians are just relieved that Trudeau's no longer there, but it took them a long time to figure that out. Folks who knew better, who were inside, who were involved, warned Canadians, myself included, that this guy is not up all that he appears to be. Now, of course, let's talk about some polling firms, and that doesn't mean picking out any, but there are some polling firms, Frank Graves being one of Ecos, who has an absolute bias, hates the Conservatives, and will do anything he can to make them look better. Hates the Conservatives, make the Liberals look better. This is, I hate to use the term, it's turd polishing 101. And it happens to be that other firms may be following into that line as well. Why? Over the past 9 years, polling firms don't just go out and make these polls, they have to be paid somehow. One of the biggest acquisitions or one of the biggest suppliers of polling in Canada is the federal government. It quadrupled the amount of money it spent, 180 million a year on polling firms. And there are many of those liberal connected polling firms who know this is time for repayment. They've got to give back a little bit of the grift that they've got over the past few years. And there are polling firms that I know very well. Main Street came out showing the Liberals were ahead in Ontario federally. They're run by Keto Maggie. He was my campaign manager in 2008. He's a Liberal insider and well connected to the party. I don't know if he's received a lot of contracts, but I can't imagine that he's ingratiated himself in staying active by not having polling contracts with every cabinet and every department. So what I'm really trying to say to people, in my experience, and it's very personal, you have to be very careful about these polls. They do not reflect the ultimate poll. And I think let the polls show the Liberals at 90% in the polls. Let people go out there and say, oh, we don't like the way one candidate's talking. He's too rough. Look, the economy's been through a bad spell. The Liberals made a decision that they're now trying to disavow. If you want to think that they can change like that, or change, as they say, the old leopard changing the color of its spots, good luck with that. Because at the end of the day, you're going to deal with a party that, if it can come back to power, assuming, of course, they're clinging to power with no accountability. Parliament hasn't sat since September, as I said, June. It has sat, but it's not doing anything other than question period and a few other moves. If you believe that that's the way your country should be moving ahead and you're good with that, then I can actually say that you're either ignorant or you're undemocratic, and it's very anti-Canadian.
Dan, that brings us to, again, I like to get a little bit of your prognostications from time to time, just based on your experience and your decades, in this world. And, as I say, 18 years as a sitting member of Parliament. Where do you see things going? Do you feel in your heart of hearts that we're going to have to wait until the end of the current mandate before there's an election? Or do you feel that Canadians are probably going to the polls sooner than later? What is your heart telling you? What's your mind telling you? And if you're just reading the tea leaves, what are they telling you?
Well, it takes all three parties to bring down the government. But we've seen Jagmeet Singh and the NDP. Think about it, NDP people out there who listen to the stuff. Your party has backstopped Trudeau on everything, even after saying it wouldn't, it did, and it might do it again. So if Jagmeet Singh lies, deceives, tries to play this game that only has New Democrats thinking he's greatest thing since sliced bread, then we could have we could see this election not take place till fall. Some are suggesting the emergencies considerations of the Trump tariffs might actually cause that. But I think the more immediate problem will be the 1 week where Parliament has to come back and vote supply. The government's out of money. It can't ask Parliament, which holds the authority for more money to allow our programs in our society and our government to function, without the Parliament giving approval. So we're coming to a head right at the first, second, third week of March. When that happens, unless there's a lot of gamesmanship and trickery and funny stuff happening, we should be heading into an election triggered by the third week of March for the first week, maybe even the second week of May. That's what should happen. That's what must happen. That it doesn't happen deals with one party, the NDP, that will be lying through its teeth to try to preserve, God knows what the hell they're trying to protect. If it's Jagmeet, it's no longer about his pension. But if it's about Jagmeet holding on and clinging to power for the next few months to get a few more goodies the country cannot afford, shame on the NDP. We know the Liberals are toast. They know they're toast. And it doesn't matter how you slice this next election is going to see a new government, likely a conservative government. I can't see anybody else leading it. The sooner it happens, I think, for the sake of the country, the better. Because why? We can negotiate in a crisis when our parliament isn't sitting. Look, the Second World War, Winston Churchill led his country. Parliament was open every day except for Christmas and a few other holidays during the Second World War. So if if the mother of all parliaments was open during the Second World War, a true crisis where they were being bombed from the sky in 1940 and 1941, why isn't our Canadian Parliament open? If it doesn't open by the second week of March, Canadians have every right to get to the Parliament Hill, protest, and demand with pitchforks and torches if they have to. This parliament has no legitimacy. These members must resign, and we must restore our democracy. That's what's at stake here. Forget Trump, forget Mark Carney. This is about your democracy being trashed. And if you're good enough for that, Canadians, yeah, go ahead and vote Liberal and NDP. But it says something about you. And I think everybody in this country has to be very concerned about people who are so willing to vote for progressives that they're willing to kill and trash our democracy and trash our country with it. That's not acceptable. As I said earlier, it's un-Canadian.
And this coming from Dan McTagg, 18-year MP and a longtime Liberal, and someone who's on a Privy Council and has been in the halls of policy and politics for a very long time. Let me wrap up with you, Dan, on this one. Something that the last few weeks and this tariff talk and everything else has brought to the forefront is Canadian patriotism. I don't think that I've ever seen Canadians so passionate about their country outside of when Team Canada hockey is playing in a World Cup or in the Olympics or something like that. It's been quite something to see the level of which many Canadians have risen up and said Canada first, putting flags on their profile picture, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of talk about interprovincial barriers and all of the trade barriers that exist within Canada that maybe a lot of people aren't aware of. And we're already seeing, the Premier of Quebec coming out and saying, hey, no pipeline coming through Quebec and other things. If trade within Canada and removing trade barriers, interprovincial trade barriers, is key to Canada being able to deal with something like tariffs from the US or somewhere else, why isn't everybody getting in a room and getting on board and making it happen? Again, just from your opinion, your experience.
Well, the country's changed. Ironic, a silver lining that took the orange man with the orange hair to do it for us. But we've now found a code set up, something that I think Canadians can be proud of and rejoice in the idea that, yeah, we're more than just talking about climate change and DEI, which is what we've been doing for the past 10 years, if you like it or not. Now we have something that we can say we have a common value. Let's start talking about our history, how, a very inhospitably climate country was made one of the best in the world. Let's talk about two different religions and two different peoples, English and French, were fused together to create a great nation, and how we learn to compromise and create consensus. That's the Canadian way. And maybe it's a good thing that we find ourselves in this position. It'll put to rest some of the malarkey being pushed by those on the far left that says, no, we shouldn't have pipelines built in this country. We shouldn't have manufacturing built in this country. And maybe put to question why some regions of the country get a hell of a lot more money from the very hand that feeds them. There's nothing like Quebec saying no to a pipeline when its own people are suggesting maybe it's not just such a bad idea. Quebec imports $2 billion worth of natural gas, and yet they have it right under their own feet. Why aren't they producing it? And why aren't they being able to bring that product to the rest of the world? It doesn't have to necessarily be from Western Canada. It can be their own. But the fact is that the negativity and the left saying, let's bury it in the ground and make Canada the scapegoat and the bad boy of energy is, I think, coming to a quick end. And with a new government, I think properly harnessing this newfound Canadian energy in the same way that we saw 10 years ago when we were sending our troops to Afghanistan. I think we're starting to see a Canada that is once again rediscovering itself, and the woke agenda over the past 10 years, gone in the garbage pail where it belongs.
And then just a couple minutes left with you, but I think it's important to talk about something again that I've raised several times over the months and years speaking with you. Some say you're a climate denier, you're in, bed with big oil. That's not the case. I can say that from knowing you and from having spoken to you numerous times over the last couple of years. What would you say your position is when it comes to transitioning towards greener energy, whether it's electricity or nuclear, whatever. Because I know that, and maybe I'll tee you up a little bit here, but you've said that, it's more about a metered approach and more of a marathon, not a sprint. But again, maybe just for those who are listening to you or watching you for the first time, what is kind of your position about transitioning and moving away from fossil fuels to maybe
Yeah.
a greener future?
We spent $2 trillion. We're not moving away from it. We've gone from 86% fossil fuel use in the world to 84%. You want to know what Canada's done? My old riding, Pickering. It says Pickering Township, Ontario, Canada, to commemorate sovereignty of North America's largest and first nuclear power plant for commercial reasons. Listen, being green, being trendy isn't new. Our grandparents did it for us. We will continue to do the right thing by the environment, but we will not allow any future government or any group of people, well paid, grifting, taking money from the federal government so that they can go around and call people whatever names that they want, telling us baloney about the fact that CO2 is somehow changing the weather to the point where we are not going to exist, causing a generation of young people to believe that we've done very bad. If anything, Canada is the most sought out nation in the world when it comes to clean energy. And I don't mean windmills and solar panels and burning lumber, which of course is one of the things we see in the UK. We're a country that's sought for natural gas because it's clean, and we're sought for oil because it's made cleaner. And yes, can we make improvements? You darn right. The question we have to ask ourselves as Canadians, as opposed to labeling people, I mean, they call me a climate denier. That's fine. If you don't care, I call it climate bedwetters. We have had our policies turned upside down in this country, and we've been made very vulnerable in the past week by Donald Trump, who's basically said, if your country has nothing of interest, maybe you shouldn't be a country. I know that's the wrong approach. Canadians get mad at that. But Canadians have been sold a bill of goods by a bunch of green hucksters who walked around ingratiating themselves with billions of dollars of your money, borrowed money, of my kids' money, of your grandchildren's money. How dare these people come out and make those statements? So I'm willing to stand up and challenge them. I was right on climate change. I was right on carbon taxes. I was right on EV mandates. You may not like what I have to say, folks, but when it comes to being green and trendy, we wrote the book on it 30, 40, 50 years ago. So we'll continue to do the right thing, but don't let the left and those who are mooches, usually collecting POGI and pensions and other checks from the government, tell you otherwise. As far as the oil industry is concerned, if they're going to produce 25 billion bucks in net revenues for your pensions, for your hospitals, for your teachers, for your firefighters, for your teachers, for your social programs, for equalization programs, by which Quebec and some provinces receive a substantial amount of money, we better stop biting the hand that feeds us. We better get real. And I think that's, fortunately, Scott, for those who take the argument of 10 years ago, climate denier and Greta Thunberg should be running the world, folks, you lost the battle. It's over. Canadians believe in affordability now. They think that's the number one issue, not the climate scam that so many people are shoving down our throat, which, can you believe it? They call CO2 the very thing that gives us life. They call it a pollutant. It's fundamentally dishonest. It's scientifically dishonest. They know it's faux science, and now it's being parroted by politicians who once thought this is the way to get ahead. Think of my liberal colleagues now. They all want to get off this net zero fraud, and they can't do it soon enough because they know they're going to lose the next election. The public has turned against these folks. Keep to your ideas. The small minority of you that are out there, you had your 10 years, you had it right, but you lost the battle. Accept your defeat.
And then you mentioned, affordability, of course, your website, Canadians for Affordable Energy. Where else can people find you? It's great. I would love having you here with us each week, and I love having these chats with you. But I know that folks can find you a lot of other places and engage with you elsewhere. What are the best ways to find you, Dan, when you're not with us here on
Well,
Fuel for Thought?
yeah, affordableenergy.ca is my best one. It's so president at Affordable Energy. That's my email, of course. And most people go look for me on X, and they can find me there at Gas Price Wizard. Now, I'm going to tell you something about Gas Price Wizard. I'm going to start to slowly close that down and shift to affordableenergy.ca. It makes no sense for me to have two sites running trying to do the same thing in terms of gas price prediction. So increasingly, if you go to affordableenergy.ca, you'll see the gas price prediction for a couple of days ahead. So it makes it much easier, not just to see the policies that are out there and how we respond to them, but also save yourself a bit of money along the way. If you can find another site that's willing to do that without picking your pockets, as the green folks do, then have at it. I want to know, because I'll be signing up for them.
And for those tuning in, I want you to know that Dan comes at gas pricing and energy pricing. He just doesn't roll the dice and see what comes up. You got about 30 years worth of data. I've seen the notebook many times. You look at the data, you study the data, you look at trends, you know what you're talking about. So you're doing yourself well if you go to affordableenergy.ca. There's my little plug for you, Dan.
I love it. Love it. Got some of that data right here, for instance. So you'll see a lot of it. That's from last June, but I've got books going back into 1997 and computer background as well. So all this is here, and it's all for people. Doesn't cost you a penny, but it will save you a few along the way.
Dan, as always, appreciate your time. Enjoy the rest of this day. Have a great weekend, and we'll look forward to chatting with you again next week.
Indeed, Scott. Thanks for having me. See you next week.
Pleasure as always. Thanks, Dan.